The franchise show. I hope you're all doing well. This is the show where we get under the hat of all things franchising. And it's a live show. Well, it's live if it's the 9th of June at around 5:15 in the UK and 12:15 in bits of America. And all sorts of other times, depending on where you are in the world. We had somebody from Los Angeles at the same time as somebody from New Zealand. So it was the next day for them. Now, because it's live, we love you to get involved. So pop in a comment, say hello, and get involved in our conversations. So what do we do each week on the franchise show? We take a new topic and a lovely guest. And today's no exception to that. We have a fantastic guest. But before I introduce you to him, let's let you know what we're going to talk about today. So today on the franchise show, we are going to be talking about franchise infrastructure and growth. So we're going to be talking about how you put an infrastructure into your business, how you can grow, when you should grow, when you shouldn't, what all of these different things. And look, we're going to get everyone's opinion on this, everyone's thoughts on this. Everyone has made their mistakes and learned by them in the industry. And that's what franchising is all about. So look, before we get into that, let's introduce our lovely guest. And it's David Hodgetts. Great to have you with us, David. Fantastic to have you here on the franchise show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be on the show.
You're absolutely welcome to be here. So before we get into the topic today, David, give it a brief sort of introduction to yourself and, you know, and how you've got into the world of franchising, bit of history about yourself before we get into infrastructure today.
Yeah, so I started a coffee business back in 2016. So business was called 222 Coffee. We started with a sort of a small kiosk in Swindon. Off the back of that, we opened a fairly big store, which we had a kitchen upstairs. And the sort of idea of that brand was we wanted to almost be a hybrid of a Pret and a Costa in a really simple version back in the day, because I at the time felt that if you go into sort of a big chain, you go there for the coffee, but not the food. And then at the time, again, 10 years ago, you'd go into Pret for the food, but not the coffee. And we sort of wanted to create sort of a hybrid of that. So, yeah, we opened that back in 2016. And then from there...
A Prosta, would you call that? A Pret and a Costa?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, and it's an easy way to explain it. I mean, obviously,
no,
the coffee connoisseurs of the world would know that Costa don't necessarily do the best coffee, so it's not necessarily doing it the greatest justice when I call it a Costa hybrid, but it's the easiest way to explain why we decided to go down that route. And yeah, so from there we sort of the demand was really strong, the store was performing well, so I felt that we shouldn't wait to open more stores before franchising, and I've got sort of quite strong views on that. But we then franchised in 2017, ended up opening quite a few shops across the UK before exiting in 2020 to a public company. So they actually own the Esquires brand.
Is that Cook? Is it Cooks?
Cooks, yeah, they're called Cooks Coffee now. And during that period, I sort of stayed within the business for 2 years on like an earn out, they call it. And yeah, we opened probably close to 40 sites in the end, and took a stack of learning off the back of the whole process, especially the earn out period with Cooks, and then sort of fast tracking to now. From a number of reasons, I decided to start a group this time to sort of, rather than have one particular brand, we've started a group called DMH Brands, which has got zero innovation, as that's just my initials. And we have a couple of core businesses. So one is Dirt Coffee, which is a new franchise brand to market. We're looking to open, 100 or so sites over the next couple of years. But again, it's just a number. Like everyone says that you've got to go and deliver it, but we've got a very specific plan with that. Another is Heaven Soda, which is not franchise related, but we're in the sort of gut health field, where it's gut friendly soda but contains magnesium as well, so it's a little bit different to those sort of competitors out there. And then the other core business is, we call it the franchise bud, but we're basically working with brands that are looking to franchise or they're franchising, and that can look a number of ways. So it could be helping them in raising funds to expand. It could be helping them in their sales pipeline operationally, and preferably it would be to work with a select number of businesses almost throughout the whole journey to where they want to ultimately get to. And that, that's been really interesting, sort of like working on that over the past couple of months. So that's sort of a bit of an overview of where I am at the moment.
I love it. And it's great to, I mean, we've definitely got coffee in common here. And it's really interesting to sort of hear your story of starting that brand and that journey with 222 Coffee, and how that journey is probably going to be quite different with Dirt Coffee, different values. And I always say this with franchising, that's what you're buying into. You're buying into someone's learnings. Someone bought into your learnings with 222 Coffee, right? But now you've had even more learnings when you're expanding Dirt Coffee. You're going to do it in a slightly different way with those learnings. So I love it. I love it. It's fantastic. We've got a few people here live, so let's say hello to a few people who have already joined us before we continue our conversation. We've got the lovely Kelly Steinecker calling in all the way from Scottsdale, Arizona, and she's put good morning from sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. Yo, that's my impression. It's good, isn't it? My American impression. Who else have we got? We got the lovely Johnny Joseph. He's put hi franchise fellows from a once again sunny and getting warmer Los Angeles, which Harvey already mentioned. Absolutely. Johnny is a bit of a regular, former guest on the show, and I hope future guest. We need to talk about that, Johnny. He is and he's going to correct me on this. It's a quiz for me to get what he does right. He's a franchise royalty auditor. I'm going to say that this week, Johnny. Tell me if I'm wrong. But look, fantastic. He absolutely gets to the bottom of the infrastructure of these businesses and what's right and what's wrong. So it's going to be great to hear your thoughts today, Johnny. We have got Katrina. We got Kat with us. She's put Harvey, wonderful to see you today. It was fantastic to have you with us, Kat. I think I'm getting this right. Kat is with Your Man and a Van. A great franchise here in the UK. So great to have you with us. And I met Kat at the EF 100s, which I was doing some red carpet interviewing. It was exciting stuff. But great to have you with us. Who else have we got? We got the lovely Neil Newman. Neil has put hi all. As an infrastructure operations guy, I'm interested to hear what this pertains to. Pertains, good word, Neil. So yes, absolutely, we're going to get absolutely into what that infrastructure is, what it means, and how we're going to help people improve their infrastructures in their businesses. But we've got 3 more comments, so let's get to these before we get further in today's conversation. We've got the lovely Charles Caldwell with us. I absolutely always appreciate Charles coming on the call from Hong Kong. It's about 1 a.m. for Charles, so he's a legend to always appear and say hello. So thanks so much, Charles. I hope you're doing well. Kelly has come back with, I just love you hearing you say yo. Well, there you go. Said it again. 2 for the price of 1 today, Kelly. Johnny's come back with spot on, Harvey. Well, I clearly nailed it in terms of what Johnny does. So, and Johnny, let us know if you'd like to be on the show again so we can get into audits and royalties and all that sort of business. So let's get into this. So David, let's let's start by kind of trying to get into what infrastructure, what is it infrastructure in a business? What elements make up the infrastructure? Let's use a coffee business here, because we're both very familiar, and pretty much anyone listening in is going to know what a coffee shop is. So what is the infrastructure in that business, and when is it prime for franchising?
So do you mean, just to be clear, the infrastructure that's needed to sort of deliver the franchise process, or the infrastructure within a coffee shop? Or
I think both, but I think let's at the moment let's look at the infrastructure that's needed to deliver a franchise business, so that can apply to other businesses.
yeah,
But we can blend that across.
yeah,
But what elements do you need? I suppose things like staff, ops manuals, FDDs, franchise agreements,
yeah,
these sorts of things, I suppose we're looking
sure.
at.
I mean, I think that if I'm off topic, just let me know. But I suppose from the ground up, the
It's all
sort of
right. We're rebels here on the franchise show and go in any direction we like.
yeah, obviously the basic stuff that's required to start franchising is the core, the ops manuals, franchise agreement, financials that you've got, because generally speaking, I think franchisees in general have, definitely in food and drink and the experiences I've had there are probably maybe three key things that they repeat all the time. And one of them is sort of like financial information and comparisons. One of them is emphasizing the importance of a good property. And then the other is probably, I mean, there's probably more than three, but the other comes to sort of finance and support. I think they're the things that I generally feel like franchisees get concerned about the most. But from a franchisor perspective, yeah, you need the operating manuals, franchise agreements, financials in play. And then I think that from there, if you want me to expand from a franchisor perspective, and I've learned a lot from this, especially with the franchise burden, working with franchisors, and I've been a little bit amazed with the lack of infrastructure in some of the franchise businesses, to be honest. But I think that take our perspective, we have an internal. So the way that we've built our structure now is that if somebody became a franchisee, we have an internal property person that deals solely on finding locations for franchise partners, because it is the most important thing. And I think that you find that if you don't have that in play, they end up either having to do it themselves, and that can be a real stress, or they work with external property agents, which from experience of doing that, you only get 5% of their time. So it can actually take a long time. And there is a sweet spot with franchisees where, it's quite notorious if you don't get them moving over a fairly, over the first couple of months, they can, become a little bit disheartened with the process of franchising. So it's really important from a franchisor perspective to hit the ground running and give the franchisees confidence in, what you're doing with the property and how things go from there. And then obviously moving through the gears, you need to have finance in place, so maybe relationships with the banks and stuff. Ideally, around with marketing, like in-house, but if not, freelance. And then obviously the ability to train and deliver for franchisees, staff, etc. I've missed a few things out there, but I'm just conscious of not taking too long going through the whole cycle. But yeah,
I think it's nice to just sort of understand some of the elements that make up infrastructure. These sorts of conversations are never intended to be a sort of how-to guide on whatever the topic we're talking about. We're just having a conversation around these topics, and I think you've picked out some really interesting ones, because a lot of our franchise businesses out there are bricks and mortar businesses. I've been involved in the QSR industry, and there's other industries that you need a property of some sort, or a location. I mean, if it's a kiosk, right? You need a location, and you need those locations. Really, it's so crucial to the success of it, whether this is a franchise business or organically grown company business. Right? Having that right location in that right place is so important. It's so important, you know,
100%.
because the coffee shops are not destination venues. If you've got a franchise business that's a destination venue, let's say you're opening a McDonald's, right, or a KFC or whatever, one of these brands, right? Okay, it tends to be you'll find a place and people will go, okay, a thing has opened up in our town, we will visit that thing, right? Or if it's a drive-through. But a coffee shop, it really relies on people coming past, and it becomes part of their daily routine. So you're absolutely right. As part of the, and you asked the question at the beginning there, should you talk about the infrastructure for a coffee business or for a franchise business? Well, look, we're having to mix the two together, because whatever your business is, whether it's a pet care business or a home care business, elements of the infrastructure are unique to your industry. Right? So we're going to use this example because it's very easy for us, the two of us on the screen here today, to build the coffee shop picture, but also anyone else can build a coffee shop picture in their mind. Let's have a look. We've got a few more people on here. I do like the fact that Johnny has put spot on, Harvey. I'm going to use that that comment regularly throughout today whenever I say anything. Let's have a look at what else Johnny's got to say here. Johnny's put a key component of the franchise infrastructure is ensuring that franchisee royalties, the lifeblood of licensors, are being paid properly. Please share with us how you've ensured you are getting all the royalties payable. How does this change when the system grows beyond 50 to 100 franchisees? Well, look, this is one element, right, of infrastructure, right? Obviously, the majority, in fact, all franchise businesses have a royalty payment of some sort, because that's the whole principle behind it. What's your experience of royalty payments going back over your experiences with your brands?
I mean, it's a really good point. I mean, the royalties are probably the most important. Well, I mean, from a franchisor perspective, in terms of being sustainable longer term, I think that, again, a lot of businesses that I'm speaking to at the moment, they are really struggling to get royalties received at all. So a lot of them are dealing with franchisees that are sort of going to them and saying that they're struggling to be able to pay the royalties, or that they're not going to pay the royalties. And I think when you're in that early growth stage, it's really difficult for them, because on one side they don't want to have, you know, issues or closures or problems with franchisees, because they want to grow the brand. But at the same time, if they're not getting that recurring revenue, you just become reliant off one-off fees, and that can become a real headache. I think from my experience of it, that was one of the issues that, you know, one of the learnings with 222 was we were charging 8% royalties, and I think on average we were receiving maybe 4 across the board, which is okay, but it's just a reality. And don't get me wrong, you know, you had COVID during that period, you had different things that go on. But then when I transitioned into Esquires, because that was part of the deal, was to work with them as well, I sort of learned that they were having similar challenges when it came to the royalties with franchisees. And I think, again, going back to what we're doing with Dirt, and the sort of the learnings I've had, is that the average opening that we were doing before was maybe 250, 300,000 to open a coffee shop. If you look at Esquires, it's 300. If you look at Black Sheep, it's mental, like 400-500K. And that the rents are incredibly high, the overheads are so high. I just don't see how it's, to be blunt, massively sustainable from a franchisee's perspective. And I think what I'm trying to do with Dirt is to create an incredibly low cost model, so that for example, the shop that we're opening in 2 weeks, the investment's about 100K for the franchisee. Their rent is 20. and the break even is probably 3 times lower than the shops that I've been doing previously. So and the idea of that is obviously to end up having an infrastructure of franchisees that pay their royalties properly, and they're not under so much pressure from their other overheads that they don't pay your royalties. But it's a really interesting one. And again, the people that I'm working with at the moment, I haven't come across any that are getting royalties paid at all. And that's probably being a bit blunt, but
I think you've happened upon, and Johnny, thanks for this comment as well. You've happened upon something here that I think is really important, because in franchising, right, if you haven't got your financials right, okay, if you haven't got any, we're looking at royalties there, but if you haven't got an element of the financials right, if someone is not making money, right, that is where they don't want to pay royalties. That is where they cease to see the value in paying royalties. And that is where they start to go off the franchise model. You know, they start to go, well, can I go down to Tesco's and buy some milk? Or, you know, can I do something that's a little bit cheaper? And that tends to, it tends to stem from the financials, doesn't it?
Well, if you think if you've got a coffee shop that's cost, call it 400,000 to open, and that's obviously, you know, I'm referencing the one that I said because that their model is huge investment, and like that you need to sign up to do multiple stores, but you've put all that capital in. You're then probably opening a shop where the rent's 100k, you've got rates. Then with the break even being so high, you probably need 5 staff on shift or whatever it might be. And then you break all of that down, then, you know, it becomes quite stressful. And, you know, you can see from a franchisee's perspective why they become a bit more disgruntled with paying royalties at that level when they've put, I think, like, I mean, Black Sheep as an example is obviously their model as franchisors is they are going to create a lot of value in their brand that will probably exit for a lot of money one day, despite the fact that as a model it loses a fair bit of money. So it's actually going back to like franchising businesses. In some ways, it doesn't feel like it's right for them to be getting franchisees on board because they're just almost using their capital to grow their brand. And I think I've seen that again, like before, the investment level was a lot higher with previous businesses that I've had, and I got it from a franchisee's perspective sometimes when their overheads were high. And I think this time around, I'm doing it where there's almost no excuse for royalties to be paid because it's like the investment level's so low. We've looked after their capital so much differently to other brands out there that I feel confident in saying, look, you know, you need to pay our royalties. We're giving you so much support here, etc.
I think you're right, actually. Right, the royalty payments constantly have to be. You've got to say to a franchisee, right, this is what you're getting for your royalty payment. They understood that at the beginning, right? But as they grow, as they develop, as they start to learn things, they still need to be reminded what the value of that royalty payment is, what they're getting for that money. Before we go on today, I'd love to welcome Hugh to the franchise show. He's an absolutely epic fella. Hugh is, of course, from Urban Baristas. I've met Hugh a fair few times. He's also growing a lovely coffee brand as well. So it's great to have you with us, Hugh. And look, it'd be great to hear your experiences of infrastructure. You know, you're growing a relatively young brand there. You know, what experiences have you had of setting that infrastructure up? How have franchisees reacted to that infrastructure that you've been trying to put in place? What have been your learnings from it? Great to have you with us. If you have just joined us today, this is the Franchise Show, and today we are talking about franchise infrastructure and growth. And it's been a fascinating conversation so far. So please, if you're here, pop in a comment, say hello, and get involved in our conversation, because you are the producers and the directors of this show. When I started today, I had that much written down. There we go. Now I've got a lot of things written down because I also am absolutely learning as these conversations go on. It's been a fascinating one. Look, we've spoken. Sorry, go on.
No. I was I was just going to elaborate on the franchisor world and being a franchisee, but I think it's just the problem with me is if I don't say it straight away, I'll forget what I was going to say. So I think for me with franchising, obviously it's probably happening more this time around when I speak to potential franchisees, and a couple of people touch on that they're not sure if they're going to do their own brand or if they're going to franchise, and that probably happens maybe a little bit more than it did 7, 8, 9 years ago. But I think if you look at the franchise world, it's obviously it's huge, it's growing. You sort of feel like every business is trying to franchise, and I think from a franchisee's perspective, it can be quite tricky because you've got, think of it from like a food and drink space. You've got your Costa Starbucks where you need 2.5 million or whatever it is liquid to launch. You've then got the brands that come to market from overseas. So like Tim Hortons, let's say, where from an outsider's perspective, you'd go, well, this is a brand that I want to be involved with, like amazing infrastructure out in America or Canada, whatever. But effectively, you're working with a master franchise holder who they're not necessarily they're not as experienced as the people that might operate 20, 30 coffee shops or whatever in the UK. And, you're getting on board with brands like that, where again, the investment levels are huge to open one of those, but they don't have the infrastructure that probably people think in the UK. And then probably the level that I've had dealings with recently is that there are a lot of brands that are franchising where they really do not have the infrastructure it's a little bit scary at times. Like they don't have the operating side, the manuals, and you're having people sign up for these brands and commit a lot of money to opening those stores. And I think that there's quite a sweet spot with, if you actually break it down, there's actually not that big a percentage of brands that would be optimum for people to necessarily get involved in. And I think if you get involved with the right ones, obviously the opportunity is huge because you can probably scale with them and you can almost work with that brand. But I just think the more again, when I did the deal with Cooks, and I do say what I think, and I can write a list of things that I'm not very good at as well. But I was amazed when we did the deal to help expand internationally and to get their knowledge to take us up a level. And the first day after we did the transaction, I remember meeting their management team and thinking, we've got 4 times more people in our head office than they had. And it was unbelievable to see what is a chain of about 100 sites, about 50 in the UK, operate with effectively 1 or 2 people. And I think it's just, I think that going back to the royalties, you've got to have a good infrastructure as a head office to be able to justify those royalties too. But anyway, sorry, it was on my mind. I thought I had to say it because it frustrates me sometimes.
No, I think it's really important to say it. And, you've said a huge amount of good things there. When we're looking at infrastructure, and that's the topic today, growth and infrastructure. And you said there about some of the US brands. It's made me think about a few of these as they're appearing in the UK. And you're absolutely right? Whether it's your Popeyes or your Dave's Hot Chicken or Raising Cane's, there's a lot that are coming in now, actually, from the US. There's a bit of a surge of them coming, right? And you're absolutely right. As a prospective franchisee, you would be mistaken in thinking everything's set up, massive US company, everything's set up here in the UK. Look, I'm not making any comment about any of those brands, right? But you're right. You might have a master franchise here in the UK that is taking the principles of what's happened there in the US and trying to adapt that to a new market. It's not starting from scratch, but those master franchise businesses really have to know what they're doing in order to lift that brand up in the same way as it grew in the US. It's almost a bigger challenge as starting a new brand.
I think I think the thing is obviously don't get me wrong, like a number of them are amazing at what they do and stuff as well. But I think that they're obviously really smart too. So there was one that's a chicken-based brand. I think it's, again, it's all about levels. So to open a lot of these, they're quoting like £1 million to open a shop, a lot of them. And it's just, so you've got to, you can't compare that to, I don't know, if someone wants to do a coffee van, let's say, and they want to work with Cafe to You and put 50K in or something. But what, this one particular brand, they've opened in prime location in central London, where their revenue is going to be amazing, and they'd be able to quote that to potential franchisees and go, look, we're doing X £1 million revenue. But the reality behind it is they've opened a site there purposely in the primest location in the UK. The numbers behind it, the rent will be you're talking hundreds of thousands for rent, the rates, the labour, etc. Yeah. So you probably need to be doing like £2 million revenue just to cover those bills, let alone your cost of goods and stuff on top of it. But then if you're a potential franchisee, and they'll be attracting people that have got big pockets, probably multi-unit people, who are obviously they're smart at what they do, that they'll be looking at the headline figures and going, well, this revenue is incredible, I want a piece of this. And I
think this is a really interesting one, actually. I mean, actually yesterday we did a special of this on franchise regulation, FDDs, all these sorts of things, transparency, lots of things like that. And I think this is really interesting what you're talking about in the perspective of what we're talking about today in infrastructure, right? Because if you've got one location as a franchisor and you decide that is the time that you're going to launch as a franchise business, right? We're in a self-regulated environment here in the UK, right? And if you decide that's the time, okay, and like you said there, if your one location is incredibly successful in terms of revenue, right, and that is what you've got to give a franchisee as a example of what they could do, it's a tricky one. We were talking about due diligence. Let's talk about this for a moment, actually, right? In terms of infrastructure, in your view, how many locations do you need, company-owned equity sites, before you can say, well, look, we've got 3, we've got 5, we've got 10, that shows a good average for a franchisee to look at those financials?
I think it's a really tricky one, because I don't necessarily think that I'm struggling with it a little bit, because from my perspective, with 222, for example, we open one site, and the way that I felt about the brand at that point was I didn't see, and this wasn't, it was like an average, it was an okay location, Swindon, it was nothing crazy. But from my perspective, I didn't see huge value in us. I didn't think much would change between us opening that one and if we went and opened another 4 or 5. I thought that the model was good, the coffee was good, product was good, etc. Obviously learn a stack from it. Again, like, I'm not doing that model this time around. We had kitchens in the first X number of stores, and replicating that model from a franchisee's perspective was really tricky. Franchisees having their own fresh food production, like a quasi Pret. You turn up if you've not been there for a couple of weeks, and they're doing different bread, and they're you look at the chiller and you're like, what, this is not the food that we have in our other shop. And I also think that with that business, we ultimately ended up having a number of corporate stores. But the problem, the balance is that if you've got problems in those stores, you've got staff issues, etc., it doesn't matter what anybody says, you will prioritize those over the franchisee stores when you're having those issues that you go through. So I think it's just a balance as a franchisor of having corporate stores, but also, you don't want to spread yourself too thin with corporate stores, because you have to put all of your focus into the franchisee. So I going back to the Popeyes thing, that or the chicken brand, is the point I was saying on that was more that if you're a potential franchisee and you're new to market, let's say, if you saw the numbers and the top level was saying 3 million revenue, you would be like, where do I sign? You know, because it just sounds unbelievable. But then the background to all of that is a lot more, you know, there's a lot more to it. And there's probably not that much wiggle room. You know, if they go to 2 million revenue, or, you know, something happens or another shop opens, all of a sudden it could be, you know, tough to break even or whatever. And I think that, so I think it's an experience thing as well. Like for me, we're very specific now on like low cost openings, specialty coffee, keep it really simple so that the franchisees get a return on their investment. They're sustainable. It's almost a bit more boring, but you know, that's a good thing to do for franchisees, is to just look after their money. So yeah, I've sort of answered that, but it's not the easiest thing to answer.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you're saying there about revenue as well. Right, we're looking at infrastructure today. Revenue is part of this, right? I think franchisees need to embrace the P&L, right? You know, you said there about something that was a bit boring. Well, I've always found P&Ls a bit boring, but right, a P&L reveals a lot of things about what's going on. You mentioned there about revenue. Well, it's all very good if a revenue is 3 million. It sounds fantastic. And I suppose if you're a bank, that's brilliant that £3 million is running through your bank. But if you're a franchisee, revenue is interesting. But what is much more interesting is net profit or EBITDA, or what is left at the end of that, because that is what is giving you that return on investment. Return on investment doesn't come from revenue, does it?
No. And I think as a franchisor, from a franchisee's perspective, it's learning what not to do as well. Like if, like from my perspective, going into what we're doing and working with the franchisees, I feel like I could write a book of like what not to do when it comes to opening a retail site or whatever. And I'm not going to be right about all of that, but I think if you know, you need to stick to your guns with that. And so if a franchisee came and said that they want to open a 120,000 rent location in Oxford Street, I wouldn't want them unless they can go, okay, we've got 5 million cash and we want to have that as a flagship for us to then open a few more. Okay, you'd consider it, but I wouldn't let a franchisee open a site like that, because I know that the overheads behind it and everything, it just becomes it's to me, it's not viable for unless a coffee shop starts doing like the brunch menu and increasing the average spend. I feel like it's something that you should do as a franchisor if you want to grow the brand, but you shouldn't let your franchisees be the people that absorb those overheads just to grow your brand. And that goes back to what I said with Black Sheep, where they've raised a ton of money and they were doing corporate stores, and now they're not doing any corporate stores. They're franchising everything. And franchisees are putting in some of the sites I go to, they must be spending so much money to open those locations. And I think that, so again, you know, like shopping centers is something that we're generally avoiding doing because you know, a number of reasons. Yeah, like, you know, probably would look for a good rent deposit. Often residential developments can be really good because you've got landlords that often are really, really amenable. They give good landlord contributions. They give good rent-free periods. There's less competition. So you've got, you know, we did one where it was us and Starbucks rather than having 10 coffee shops. And I think that, again, so rather than like from a quantity perspective, I think franchisor, it's more about just being really clear, being able to almost mentor the franchisee in avoiding making those mistakes. And like, I've made those mistakes. You know, we've opened sites that you look back on and you go, you know, that's why that location didn't work. But at times it was at the expense of the franchisee, because obviously that is what happens when you grow in a business and you know, it's the first time that you've done the franchising side.
I think this is interesting, because when we're talking about infrastructure here, and I've spoken to lots of people about when they get their first franchisees, as an example, right, and how they're choosing the right people to be in their business, and how they often don't choose the right people. And then you know what you're saying there about locations, and I completely agree with you. Oxford Street, Regent Street, other areas perhaps in, you know, Manchester and Birmingham, they are essentially marketing spend, right? If you open up in Regent Street or Oxford Street with a flagship store of whatever brand, what that is a marketing spend, right? Because they make tons of revenue, but they don't make any margin because everything's so expensive, right? And it,
Sorry, you can hear my dog barking.
that's all right. It's all part of the fun. I like the way that your dog is so passionate about franchise infrastructure.
No, he's passionate when someone knocks on the door. Unbelievable.
We have got Simon here. It's great to have you with us, Simon. He's put hello, franchise friends. And Simon is a franchise recruiter here in the UK. So great to have you with us, Simon. Let's have a little bit of a sort of a jump into the future now. I mean, as you're planning to develop the infrastructure of your business, you know, what sort of things have you got in the pipeline to bolster up that infrastructure? How are you going to do things?
Can you hear my dog, by the way? Is it? Can you not hear him?
A little bit, but I like it. It's
my
good.
Gosh, sorry. Can I just close this door? Because it's like he's just a Shih Tzu, but it's like listening to.
You can't swear. You're not allowed to swear.
Honestly, gosh.
Well, look, if you have just joined us today, we are in the last 5 minutes of the franchise show. Today, we've talked about franchise infrastructure, and I've been talking to this clock. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
All good stuff.
Anyway, sorry. Let us know. What's our plan for growing the infrastructure with what we're doing? Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's it.
So in terms of our head office and what we're doing?
I think, look, we're talking about infrastructure and how that influences growth. So what key things are you doing within your business to, head office, manuals, anything?
So with where we're at the moment, the sort of key hires that we've made are an in-house property person, which is relatively unique, I think, for franchisors. And again, I think that the point on that is it from a franchisor's perspective, it can be a good revenue opportunity too, because property agents probably charge a £6,000 acquisition fee. So that's what there's an expectation for that. So you can, from a franchisor's point of view, you can generate revenue from it, as well as from a franchisee's perspective, get a much more hands-on experience where you've got someone that is available 5 days a week to answer the call and to help you progress things. We've got an interior designer, because again, I feel that property design, project management are 3 key components when it comes to this process. So we've got somebody that does all of those processes. And then from an execution perspective, at the moment, we've got an ops manager, a trainer, and a couple of people in marketing that effectively will help deal with the launches. As we grow, I will put a lot more resource behind like the post-opening support. So, you know, you might get maybe an auditor, recruit another trainer. Quite straightforward, really. As the brand grows, we'll just scale accordingly. Again, like some of them will be amazing as well, by the way. But some of the ones that I've been dealing with, they almost have like one person for 25 sites. And I think for me, we want to probably have, you know, one ops or trainer per maybe 8 to 10 sites. So that's where we are. And then, you know, finance and everything, all of that side is, you know, we've got those relations with banks and stuff, so we help with that side. But it can be tricky because also, you know, I say about franchisors and how you've got a massive variety of franchise operators out there, but from a franchisee perspective, you know, they also can be quite, you know, cheeky in what they look, you know, what they expect from a franchisor too. So it's about mentoring the franchisee of like the fact that they do need to take elements of ownership with that process. You know, it's not
definitely.
just a, click the fingers
It's
and
a
you work.
two-way thing. It's a joint thing as you grow. But look, I think one thing you've hit upon here, which I think is a really interesting point to end, a really interesting thought point to end, actually, which is how we grow our teams and infrastructure as our business grows. And no one's ever really sort of set this in stone as to the best way of doing this. You know, you get a business, you get one shop, you get a franchisee, you get one support manager, you know, you get a marketing person, you get two shops. You know, no one's sort of said this is the best way to do it. And I think it's a really important conversation as to how you grow your teams, how you grow that physical structure. When do you get a head office? Do you need a head office? Right? You know, is that some? Do you need a training facility? Is that
Yeah.
a location? And I think it's a fascinating thing.
You also, I suppose, the better the franchisee and the more engaged they are, in some ways, the less that you need as a franchisor. Again, one brand that we're working with or that we've spoken to, they are not receiving royalties from franchisees. And it's like a clockwork headache because they're just always needing help and support. But what they've done is they've really recruited franchisees that they probably shouldn't have, which just means that the workload they need is so much greater. If you've got a good franchisee, they do. The flip side is they do get to the point where if you turn up, they're almost like, well, why are you here? We're in complete control. We're happy, you know, and it's that balance. But getting the right, that's why the point on the royalties that was made is so important, because building that recurring revenue from royalties means that as a franchisor, you don't need to make bad decisions with who you're signing up as franchisees, because you've got that revenue coming in to support you as a franchisor. Because obviously, franchisors need to be well capitalized, and I think a number of them maybe are not as well capitalized as we all sort of feel like they are. So yeah.
No, absolutely. Look, we have come to the end almost of today's episode. I'd like to first of all thank everyone who has been here live with us today. Everyone who's going to watch this in the future, please pop in comments onto LinkedIn or YouTube. We can continue to answer those. And I think it's been a fascinating conversation, and I'd definitely like to thank the lovely David for his time as well. We have now come to the last part of today's show. Now, this is part of the show where my camera will go off. That's not because I've broken something. It's because this part of the show is sponsored by my lovely friend, Paul Murphy, and he is a hatter. That noise was the fact that I should have got my hat prepared, and I just nearly fell over. There you go. Look at this beauty. This part of the show is sponsored by PJ Murphy and Son. So if you'd like a hat like this one, speak to Paul. Now, this is also the part of the show where we're going to stop talking about franchise infrastructure for a little bit, and we're going to find out a little bit about David. He also is going to get the chance right now to get his own back on me and ask me any question he likes. But before he does that, I'm going to ask you, David, have you ever met anyone famous? Have you got a claim to fame or something we don't know about you? And you can choose any of that.
God, I don't know. Andy Murray, maybe.
Andy Murray. Oh,
yeah,
no.
I mean, when I went homeschooled when I was about 12, 13 to train to be a professional tennis player. So that was my growing up. Was I did that until I was about 19, and then had a pretty horrific injury that still hasn't recovered to this day. That meant I had to stop. But yeah, so that would probably be the one. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I don't think we've ever had an ex-professional tennis player on here, so I like that one. Well, look, you've answered these questions beautifully. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, but it is now your chance to get your own back on me. And I don't know what this question is going to be, and you can let me get away with it. No one ever has, but I'm looking forward to the day that somebody does. But if you would like to ask me any question you like, no holds barred, you can.
Oh, this is stressful. If you were to open, it is franchise related, but if you were to open any type of franchise, what would you open?
It is a good question. I think because I trained to be a chef, and my passion has always been food, hospitality, and QSR. So I think it would have to be something within QSR, even though when we've gone through what happens in coffee shops and QSRs, it's a tough market. But look, I love it. I think even when you cook a meal for someone at home and they smile when they eat that meal, or when I used to be a waiter and you put some food down, I think that's what hospitality is about. You know, you're looking to try and please those people. So I think it would have to be a hospitality business, but I'm not sure which one. Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, look, David, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
it's been great to have you on. I'd like to thank again everyone who's been here this week. Please join us next week for the, oh gosh, some sun shining at me now. Please join us next week for the franchise show. That is going to be Tuesday, the 16th of June, 5:15 GMT, 12:15 EST, for another fascinating conversation. And until next time, my friends, take very good care. Cheerio.